is a leader in diabetes revolution in India. And his name is synonymous with diabetes in India and is a source of inspiration to many young diabetologists in India. In fact, Dr. Mohan is known as father of Indian diabetes in India. Dr. Mohan is an international figure for India in diabetes. Over to Dr. V. Mohan.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the kind invitation. I'd like to thank Satya Brahma and all of you for inviting me to be here today. What I'll do, I know I'm standing between you and lunch, so I won't take very long. What I'll try to do in the next 20 or 22 minutes is to tell you something about where we are with diabetes in this country, and then share with, which is quite shocking actually show you some unpublished data just off the press. And then I'll share with you 2 success stories to show what can be done in India. I think that fits in with the theme of Make in India, because both these projects are actually done in Chennai, in India, just to tell you that things can happen in India. So let me start, because I have no conflict of interest to declare in this talk, because it's a very general talk. I'd like to start with this slide, and this slide is something which I helped my late father, who actually is the father of diabetology in India, Professor M. Vishwanathan, because he is the father of diabetes in India, because he started the first diabetic clinic in India in the Stanley Medical College in 1948, and that clinic still continues. So as a young medical student, first-year medical student actually, I joined him to work with diabetes, the field of diabetes, when he set up when together we've set up the first private diabetic clinic in India in 1971. So I used to make his slides at the time, and this is a slide which he used to show, and I'll just show you the contrast that has occurred in the last 40 years. So the urban prevalence of diabetes in India at that time was around 2%, and this is based on the ICMR study, multi-center study, and in rural India it was about 1%. So that's what we had in India at that time, 2% and 1%. And he used to show the slide that when Indians migrate to the UK or to Tanzania or to South Africa, Singapore, Malaysia, Fiji, and so on, or to the US, that there was a huge increase in the prevalence of diabetes. And we used to call it as a migrant Indian phenomenon, that the Indian here doesn't have much diabetes, but when you migrate, because you become more affluent, you put on weight, you don't exercise that much, mainly obesity, probably some stress leads to diabetes. And we used to just show that, it's a migrant Indian phenomenon. I'll show you how things have changed, and it's completely reversed now. So this was the figure from which that came, Ahuja study, 2% in urban, 1.5% in rural. If you run through the slide, of course, there are limitations of studies like this because they're not done using the same methods, they've used different sample frames, and so on. But the message is loud and clear, that in urban India, if you just see, it's almost like a numerical, in the numerical proportion, it's rising, 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, 6%, 11%, 12%, 13, 14, 18, 20, and the latest figure from Chennai, unpublished, is now under publication, has been submitted for publication, is 24.7 or almost 25% of people in Chennai having diabetes. 25% of those above 20 years of age. We're not talking about old people here. We're talking about adults above 20 years of age. It's moved from 2% in 1970s to 24.7%. Okay? Now, if you now compare a recent study, which is also under publication, where we looked at migrant Indians in San Francisco, okay, one of the richest Indians that you can find in the world, in San Francisco, and compared them with Indians in Chennai. And when I say Chennai, we have almost identical data from New Delhi, where Nikhil Tandon, one of our collaborators, is working on this. We also have data from Karachi, which is not very different. So it's a 3-city study. But in Delhi and Karachi, they didn't do OGTTs, they did only fasting. So you really cannot compare with the San Francisco data. So for this comparison, we've used the Chennai data, okay, using very similar methods in the two. Shown in red are the prevalence rates in Chennai, and shown in yellow are the prevalence rates in San Francisco. So you can see in the Masala study, which was done in San Francisco, they had only people above 40 years of age. So for this study, from the Chennai data, we took those above 40 years of age, and we compared. And you can see that 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60, 65 plus, at every age group, in Chennai, we have higher rates of diabetes than Indians in San Francisco. So this is a complete reversal of what my father showed 40 years ago. That means two things have happened. One, that in India, it is rising much more rapidly now than in the United States. And secondly, something is being done in the US probably where it has plateaued off. So probably they're becoming more conscious, they're looking after themselves better, which is not yet happening in India. So these are very worrisome figures, okay? If you look at the next slide, it's even more worrying because if you look at, now this is not Chennai and San Francisco, this is Chennai itself. Red is pre-diabetes and yellow is, it's actually the other way around. It's actually a typo error. Red is diabetes and yellow is pre-diabetes. So what's happening is if you take 40 years, just take 50 years. Many people in this room are above 50 years of age. So if you just look at 50 years and you're in India, 77% of people in a city like Chennai or Mumbai or Delhi have either diabetes or pre-diabetes. So if you walk on the road and you start just counting people who are above 50 years of age, roughly by age, 3 out of 4 will have either diabetes or pre-diabetes, and only 1 out of 4 will have normal glucose tolerance. Now that's very, very worrying. And the reason I say this is because even now there are skeptics who say that there's no diabetes epidemic, it's all just made up, it's all pharma, it's all, a few epidemiologists who do that. Nothing could be further from the truth. We have already reached levels of diabetes which are frightening and worrisome, and as I'll show you, there's even more to worry. But where do these figures, this is just Chennai, okay? And one of the limitations is that, okay, in an urban city, Chennai, Mumbai, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and Delhi, you might have large prevalence rates of diabetes. It may not be true in the rest of India. Very true, because India is a very heterogeneous country, and you really cannot even extrapolate from one state to another. So we took up this large study, the largest study ever done in the world on the epidemiology of diabetes, the most ambitious study ever done in the world, I would say. And this is called as the Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, India Diabetes Study, or the ICMR INDIAB study. And I must give credit to my daughter, Anjana, who is now running this whole study, who right from her MBBS days, she kept saying, we need to do this big study. Papa, all you're doing is Chennai. That's not India. So finally, when she finished her MD and PhD, I said, okay, now you take over and you do the study. So it's actually she's the one who's running the study, of course, with collaborators from all over the country, and including Dr. Shashank Joshi, who will be here, who was the PI for Maharashtra. Maharashtra has been done. So total sample size is 124,000 people, representative, totally representative of India's 1.2 billion people. It took a year for us with the Mumbai Population Institute here helping us to get the study designed right. That's why the study is so fantastic. And this will give us the national prevalence of diabetes and prediabetes in India by studying every single state in the country and the union territories. It will also compare the urban and rural diabetes and prediabetes. Phase 1 has been completed. We finished 4 states, Chandigarh, Jharkhand, Maharashtra, and Tamil Nadu. Phase 2, 5 states were completed, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Gujarat, Karnataka, and Punjab. In the Northeast, 4 states have been completed, Arunachal Pradesh, Assam, Mizoram, and Tripura. And about 5 or 6 states are now ongoing. Hopefully, within another year to year and a half, we should finish the whole study. Till now, we have 52,000 people in the sample. But when we finish the first 4 states, which itself, if you look at the population of the 4 states, is 270 million people, and there are only 6 countries in the world which have a population more than 200 million. So we said, let's go and publish this, otherwise it's going to get outdated. So at that time, we came up with this number of 62.4 million people in India with diabetes, and what's more is that there's 77 million people with pre-diabetes. And that's the reason why the numbers are increasing so rapidly, because we and others have shown that if you're a pre-diabetic and you're an Indian, your chance of progression to diabetes is much faster, in fact, faster than any other ethnic group in the world, whether it's Chinese, Japanese, Europeans, any other race, they don't zoom through to diabetes as fast as Indians. And we have follow-up studies over 10 years to do this. And just 4 weeks ago, the IDF announced the new figures for India, which is 67 million people. That's based on this study. They're about adding on 1 million or so every year. But all states are not equal. And these are the states which have completed until now. And this is a weighted prevalence of both the urban as well as the rural put into one number. And you can see states like Bihar, for example, have fairly low prevalence rates, 4%, because rural Bihar is very low, urban Bihar is a little higher. Goes up all the way up to almost 14% in Chandigarh. Now, Chandigarh is an exception. It's a union territory, so you have to treat it like a state, but it's a city. So you really cannot compare Chandigarh with the rest of the country. But look at Tamil Nadu. Tamil Nadu is 10.4. The urban prevalence in Tamil Nadu, including the smaller cities, is almost 14%. And rural, it's almost 10%. So therefore, we are talking about huge numbers, but with a lot of variation between different states. So different states and different stages of evolution, socioeconomic progress, and based on that, the prevalence rates also vary. We are not worried just about the numbers of people with diabetes. What we are worried about is the complications. Again, we are very fortunate that this is the only study, the CURE study done in Chennai, the Chennai Urban Rural Epidemiological Study, where we have data both in rural Tamil Nadu as well as from Chennai. This is the only study in the whole world which has looked at all the complications of diabetes, coronary artery disease, peripheral vascular disease, retinopathy, nephropathy, and neuropathy in a population-based sample. Some have done eye, some have done kidney, but nobody has done the whole thing, and certainly nobody has done urban and rural, and these are all the publications. And I just want to point out one complication, if I may, and that's nephropathy. Now, diabetic kidney disease, you know, is one of the most terrible complications to get, because once you reach end-stage renal failure, you will die, unless you do dialysis or transplantation. And experts have shown that only 2% of people with end-stage renal disease can afford the treatment, either dialysis or transplantation. The rest will die. So we are talking about, just from the INDIAB study, we are talking about 17 million people with some form of kidney disease. All of them, luckily, have not gone into advanced kidney disease, but they have some kidney disease. And at least a third of them will progress to end-stage renal disease. So we're talking about 5-6 million people in India who can go into end-stage renal disease. And as the numbers increase, this is also going to increase. There is no way that any government, any NGO, or any hospital can take care of that many patients with kidney disease. And therefore, the only solution we have is to prevent diabetes and to prevent its complications, period. There is yet another worrisome factor, and that the epidemiology is changing. From urban areas, it's moving into rural areas. At least in urban areas, you have some clinics, some hospitals, somewhere where patients can go. But 72% of India's population lives in rural areas. 75% of India's doctors practice in the urban area. In the rural areas, there are no clinics, not even primary health centers in many of the villages. So where will they go for diabetic treatment? Where will they go for eye complication and kidney complication, leave alone blood glucose testing, which is not available there, okay? That's a problem. Where will the rural poor, how will the rural poor afford the treatment, which they cannot afford to pay? From older age groups, we thought diabetes is disease of old people. When you get 60, 70, you'll get some disease, you'll get a little diabetes. Now we're getting it when you're 15 years old. So when you get it when you're 15 years old and 20 years old, all it takes is 15 to 20 years to develop complications. So when you're 30, 35, 40, you will have your renal dialysis starting, your CABG you will go for, and all kinds of complications you will go for. You may become blind at the age of 40, 35, okay? If that happens to millions of people in India, India's growth itself can get affected, okay? Just like HIV knocked out a lot of countries in Africa, if this goes on, and it goes on forever, it can affect India's socioeconomic situation. And finally, from the high and the middle income group, it's now moving to the low income group. And my next story will show you that. And the poor really cannot afford this treatment because they'll have to spend 25 to 30% of their income just to pay for the drugs for diabetes, leave alone everything else, leave alone the consultation fees and so on. And how will they eat? What will they give to their family? It's going to be difficult unless free treatment can be given to everyone, which is not true in our country because 80% of healthcare is private in our country. It's not government given in our country. So from this background of what we have to do, the focus has to be on prevention. The focus is not just making more drugs and giving it to people because people cannot afford it, the newer drugs which come. So we have to go down to the grassroots and try to do something for people. And therefore, one of the caps that I wear is community medicine.